Throwing people from helicopters, Pinochet's reign of terror over Chile. Augusto Pinochet became president of Chile on the 11th of September 1973, when, with the support of the U.S. government, he successfully overthrew the country's democratically elected president, Salvador Allende. What followed was nearly a 17-year-long attack on Chilean human rights, democracy, and way of life that still reverberates in the country to this day. It is not known where all his victims' bodies are buried, both metaphorically and literally, as the true depths of Pinochet's political regime of terror only began to be revealed after several enlightening reports were published in the early 2000s. Who was Augusto Pinochet? Before his rise to power, Augusto Pinochet was a career soldier, born on the 25th of November 1915 in the port city of Valparaiso. He worked his way through the ranks to become the youngest student of 1948 to enter the Academy of War at just 32 years old. From there, his career took him from Chile to Ecuador and back again, as he spent the next few decades rising to the rank of Major General and even escorting Cuban revolutionary leader Fidel Castro during his trip to Chile in 1971. By January of the next year, he had become the Army's commander-in-chief, leaving him perfectly positioned for what was to come next: the coup. In the last 2 decades, declassified files have revealed the extent of the CIA's involvement in the Chilean coup, including nurturing the country's political climate to a place where a coup would be accepted, destabilization of President Allende's rule, and on-the-ground support in the case of potential failure. With an already weakened government and almost complete loss of control of the armed forces, one of the prime catalyst moments for the coup was when the commander-in-chief of the army, Carlos Prats, resigned and was replaced with someone Allende thought he could trust: General Augusto Pinochet. On September 11, 1973, the armed forces were ordered to surround major cities and areas with the potential for resistance, and cutting off communications with a clear message: they would not be afraid to kill those who defied them. Allende, despite knowing the likely outcome of the situation, refused to flee. He died in the presidential palace, and although official records claim his death was suicide using a rifle gifted to him by Castro, plenty of other evidence points to his murder by Pinochet's henchmen. Despite minimal opposition, the days following the coup were so bloodthirsty, it's unknown how many people actually died, as estimates varied from 2,000 to 10,000 casualties. One thing, however, was clear: the coup wasn't targeted just at political leaders, but anyone Pinochet and the armed forces saw as a potential threat, and even those that they didn't. Working-class people experienced bombings, roundups by the armed forces, and large-scale raids and imprisonments. Political prisoners suffered torture and brutality before their eventual murder. Some of the more shocking reports detail instances of severe beatings, psychological torture, hanging prisoners by their arms for long periods, suffocation, severe degradation, and assault, among many other horrific atrocities. After the coup was over, the new leader, Pinochet, told the press that he was only elected as the first military head due to his age, and that each armed forces chief would have their turn. The reality was that he would do anything to stop that from happening, including the murder and torture of anyone who opposed him. Pinochet's reign of terror really grew in intensity less than a month later: the Caravan of Death. On October 15, 1973, he sanctioned a series of targeted, brutal attacks that left a trail of death in their wake. He looked to General Sergio Arellano Stark, another coup leader, to spearhead the so-called Caravan of Death, claiming he was simply streamlining the justice system for political prisoners and regional representatives of the old Allende government. In other words, anyone from police chiefs to trade unionists and civic leaders were targeted and found themselves suddenly acquainted with Pinochet's newly formed death squads and marked as political dissidents. The Caravan of Death traveled via Puma helicopter to the major Chilean cities of La Serena, Copiapó, Antofagasta, and Calama, leaving a trail of 68 deaths in their wake in just over 4 days. Most of its victims were political opponents that had actually turned themselves in to the new Chilean government, only to be immediately beaten and interrogated once incarcerated. Most bodies were later found in common graves. However, 14 were never recovered, and it's possible they became some of the first to be thrown from the helicopters into the ocean, as it was later reported occurred during Pinochet's regime. These mass executions were a statement by Pinochet on how he intended to run Chile and attack non-violent opposition and even civilian supporters of the old government. After the Caravan's initial run, General Stark and other members of the death squad formed Pinochet's new Chilean secret police agency, the DINA, or National Intelligence Directorate, on June 14, 1974. Not unlike Nazi Germany's Gestapo, the members of the DINA would commit atrocities under the banner of the new law, continuing to kill and repress any potential opposition. By the end of the year, it was estimated there were over 700 agents of the DINA operating across Chile. Those detained would be shipped to prison and concentration camps, where conditions were appalling enough without the horrendous acts of prolonged torture that these victims had to endure. Pinochet's arrest. Despite his brutal tactics for remaining in power, Pinochet lost the 1988 mandated election, eventually retiring the presidency in 1990. When he stepped down, he became a senator for life. But despite all his attempts to remain untouchable, he was finally arrested in the UK in 1998 at the age of 83. In an unprecedented move against the still powerful Pinochet, Spanish authorities pushed for his extradition, and subsequently countries like the United States were pressured to release classified documents about their involvement in his regime. Among the atrocities discovered was the fate of Chilean nationals who had disappeared during Pinochet's tenure, revealing information on some of the infamous death flights that occurred across Chile and other Latin American countries in the 70s and 80s. Death flights and the Rettig Report. In 1991, the Rettig Report was released, an in-depth inquiry into the human rights abuses that occurred under Pinochet's dictatorship. In it, multiple victims of Chile's death flights are identified. These flights largely took place in Puma helicopters and were responsible for rounding up anyone they saw opposing Pinochet, ultimately drugging them and throwing them into the ocean. Tragically, this meant many people never learned the fate of their loved ones, nor were able to seek closure through the return of the bodies. Across the Rettig Report, multiple specific incidents of death flights or the use of helicopters and the removal of citizens were mentioned, the first of which was on September 25, 1973, just 14 days after Pinochet seized power. Ricardo Bustos Martinez, a 21-year-old civilian with no political ties, was arrested, beaten, and put into a helicopter. He was never seen again. Later, on October 11th of the same year, a teacher and member of the Radical Party named Luis Barrientos was arrested and put onto a helicopter. His body was found at the mouth of the Imperial River, making it extremely likely that he was actually murdered on the helicopter and then just thrown out of it. Other reports within the document reveal similar horrendous acts of violence. A former communist official, Humberto Rodriguez, was literally gutted with a knife before being thrown into the ocean. In another instance, another Communist Party leader, along with other drugged prisoners, was thrown into the ocean after being sliced open sometime around October 20th. In 2001, more of Pinochet's crimes came to light. Under the new Chilean president, Ricardo Lagos, further investigations uncovered the fate of 120 missing detainees who were tossed from helicopters during his regime. In the same year, retired Colonel Ognjen Benavente also revealed the part that Pinochet's personal pilot, Brigadier Antonio Palomo Contreras, played in the death flights, claiming that he frequently made bodies disappear using his helicopter, saying, "Some were dropped into the ocean, others were thrown on the high peaks of the Andes." But despite Pinochet's arrest, he never truly faced any consequences for his numerous crimes against humanity. He was returned to Chile on medical grounds in 2000, and the Chilean Supreme Court dropped prosecution charges against him in 2002. He resigned his seat as senator for life that same year, aged 87. And passed away on the 10th of December 2006, having lived the long life he had denied so many others.
we've got something amazing to share with you all. Thanks to our supporters in our growing Patreon army, we've been able to produce a bonus chapter for our video World War II guns still being used today. This new chapter focuses on the M4 Sherman tank, and we can't wait for you guys to see it. You can watch it now on our Patreon without ads, unrestricted and uncensored, as well as our entire exclusive Patreon library. Find the link in the pinned comment. Let us know your thoughts below.